Hello and welcome to Minter Dialogue, episode number 437. My name is Minter Dial and I'm your host for this podcast. First, I'd like to give a shout out and thanks for putting up a review of the show to Truth-Teller82, who put up a wonderful review on Apple Podcasts. This week's interview is with Tom Rainsford. Tom is marketing director of Beavertown Brewery, the fast-growing London-based brewery that was set up just 10 years ago with such recognizable names as Neck Oil, Bones, and Gamma Ray. Previously, Tom was director of brand engagement and culture at the mobile network operator giffgaff, where he spent 12 years. With a mission to encourage everyone to unleash their creative potential, Beavertown is not your ordinary company. With an executive team that professes to be a group of failed musicians, to a band that prefers to think as a band, Tom is leading a standout marketing effort. In this conversation with Tom, we look at how Beavertown has come to break through so fast, what drives their marketing tone and outputs, how to recruit when you want to do things differently, and the lessons learned that might help unleash your creative potential. You'll find all the show notes on minterdial.com, and please do consider to drop in your rating and review. And don't forget to subscribe to catch all the future episodes. Now for the show with Tom. Tom Rainsford, my lord, how fun is this? I got to listen to you just wow an audience at an event was held in a first event in this pandemic-y world in real life in a long time. And you impressed me very much, you and the brand that you work for. So Tom, in your own words, who are you?
I am Tom Rainsford. I am the marketing director at Beavertown Brewery, and we are based in Tottenham in London.
Brilliant. So you've been marketing director since September 2019, says your LinkedIn profile. Tell us your journey to Beavertown.
Yeah, so an interesting one. So I sort of, finished university and then was sort of trying to work out what I was going to do with my life. Ended up in working in marketing and doing sort of FMCG and a bit of kind of health and beauty and pharma and sort of stuff like that. And it was sort of all right, but I was like, oh, this isn't hugely interesting. And I think the bit that interested me most was kind of, if you like, an apologist for the term, but kind of like youth marketing. That led me to work for T-Mobile, who became EE. And I guess from there, I was rung up one day by a headhunter that said, there's this weird project that this network is going to do, but we can't tell you anything about it. So you want to come down and find out? And I thought, well, I might as well, I've got nothing to lose and no information to go on. And basically that turned out to be giffgaff, which is a mobile network in the UK and MVNO. And me and 14 other people launched that in 2009. And I looked after everything from, the brand, the creative output, values, culture, all that kind of good stuff with brilliant and amazing people. And we built that business from zero to being what it is today. And it's very much loved and awarded and all that kind of good things. So I did that for 10 years, which was an incredible journey, taking up essentially what was a startup business into being, a really successful business. And then I wanted to do something different, really. I sort of felt that I'd done that for a while. And I was familiar with Beavertown from a consumer perspective. And I'm also a supporter of Spurs, Tottenham Hotspur, and they've got a new stadium, or newish stadium that they opened. And Beavertown have a micro brewery, the only one, arguably in the world, or certainly the only one in Europe, in a football stadium. And I went to the opening of the stadium, and I was there, and I was looking around, and I was thinking with my mates, a couple of neck oils down, and I was thinking, yeah, this is a brand that I could see myself working for. So I picked up with Logan, the founder, and Tala, who looks after all of our people, and they happened to be in a similar space, looking for a similar type of person. So it was kind of serendipitous, really. Started the conversation, went from there, joined, and loving it since.
I love it. So let's just for 1 second lean in on this topic of youth marketing. How would you characterize that, and how is it different from old person marketing?
Yeah, well, I think it's a good point, and I think so I think I joined T-Mobile in 2006, maybe seven or something. So it's like a long time ago, and the world was a very different place. Like this is pre-pandemic by quite considerable measurements. And I think at the
Or
time,
or you could say post
or post,
pandemic,
yeah,
but another
exactly.
one.
Yeah, exactly. The previous one, or maybe even the one before that. So I think at the time it was kind of like there was a bit of a bit of a land grab over mobile. It was still at the point of growth. It was still figuring out exactly what it was going to be, and it was a little bit like there was kind of segmentation, not really segmentation. So there were brands that skewed a bit more family and brands that skewed a bit more young and stuff. And I guess my point was I liked brands that want to do things differently and are challengers. And certainly that was, the case of why I got, involved in giffgaff and subsequently Beavertown, because the premise of giffgaff was David versus Goliath, right? It was all about big mobile brands, big boys have had it too good for too long. The system doesn't work. The consumers don't benefit. Let's completely screw the model. And, when we launched that brand in 2009, Blockbuster was still the number one place to go and get videos from, right? Which is nuts, right? Because the system didn't work. Yeah, exactly, right? So, we needed to change the model. So I think it's kind of like, I don't think there is a difference now between young people marketing and old people marketing. And actually, there's some really interesting studies about how, I can't remember quite the stats, but they were something like, 90% of all people over the age of 70 think that they're unique, and 90% of people aged between 18 and 24 think they're unique. So it's like you don't get older and think you become less unique. So I don't think there is a difference now, if I'm honest. I think that where brands can be smart is actually it's about mindset rather than demographic. But you can't buy media in mindset yet, although arguably in some ways you can. You have to buy demographically, but equally, actually, smart brands, it kind of doesn't matter, right? Do you feel the brand? Do you like the brand? Does it resonate with you? Does it stand and align to your value set? And that's kind of regardless, or should be regardless of age, demographic, and all the rest of it. So I think that terminology probably doesn't exist anymore.
It's interesting, the idea of mindset marketing. I mean, the term we hear a lot about is neuro marketing, but that's more about clicking and getting actions to happen and so on and so forth. Whereas mindset marketing is a little bit more upstream. Would you not agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that for me, good brands are both rational and emotional, and I think in recent years, particularly startup, particularly with the catalyst of social media, mobile technology, cloud technology, apps, and Google, we have got very focused on functional, frictionless marketing, right? Which is like clean UX flows, get people A to B, Amazon, da 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 da. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? But I don't feel emotional about those brands. I don't feel I have a connection with them. They meet a functional need. What I think is important is that brands still play an emotional role. They need to do the hygiene stuff, the functional stuff, but they need to play an emotional role. And I think that's where it becomes very interesting. And I think there you are playing with mindset. You are aligning to value sets. You are aligning to people's personal belief systems and purposes. And that might simply be, I want to have a great night out and this is a brand that enables me to do that. Or it might be, I completely agree with the political stance of, this brand giving tax cuts to, employees and da 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 da. And that's fine. And, but that's not about a clean UX flow. That's about your personal alignments, that brand. Great brands should balance those two things.
In my experience, I've seen so much more of the rational, cognitive, performance numbers element, and obviously we have automation in the marketing. The funny thought that I have is that so many people will think, well, there shouldn't be emotion in this. It's all about, performance and numbers, but they forget that when you fuck up automation, you piss off your customers, and if that ain't emotion, what is?
Yeah, completely. I think the thing is, I consistently sort of think I might be slightly mad for multiple reasons, related to marketing and just, general mindset. But I grew up in the 90s, right? And, you had these brilliant Levi ads, TV ads that had amazing soundtracks that became cultural moments because the soundtrack would go to number one. Everyone at school would talk about the ad, and, they'd sell a load of products and become, the biggest brand at that time. And we moved from that into very straight data number led marketing. Now, it shouldn't be one or the other. It needs to be a balance. But to the point that you made earlier, we are leaning and have leaned quite hard into that sort of Google world. And I think my madness comes on, am I wrong? Right? Like, because I feel like there's not many people left on this island, right? Or actually, maybe I'm right, and we just need to pull it back and address it a little bit, because it's much easier to say, well, this banner ad did this, and here's some numbers, and here's why. But it's like, well, it's your point. Like, if you get it wrong, then you're lost. And actually, interestingly, if you think about COVID and lockdowns, it became very functional. And I think a lot of brands couldn't understand why people weren't coming to their website. And it's like, well, they're not coming to the website because they don't remember your brand, right? Because they don't have a relationship with it, right? So, so they don't have a relationship with it. So you need to have that brand and that resonance to build a relationship.
So if we have chance, we're going to talk a little bit more about marketing, but Beavertown, maybe not everybody knows who is and how is Beavertown. Founded in 2011, obviously linked in with Tottenham Hotspurs, the football club in northeast London. I think it's east, right? Tell us about the founding of Beavertown, and how did this brand come to exist as it is today?
Yeah, so it's founded by a guy called Logan Plant, and he was in a band. He was on tour in America, and he was sort of just running out of steam with it a bit. It had been a long tour, highlights, lowlights, and they were in New York. And this was sort of just at the very early start of that sort of craft beer revolution in the US. And the US led it, by a country mile before anyone else sort of caught up with it. And he was in Brooklyn, and he went to kind of like a barbecue beer joint, and there was sort of, great meats and beers to go with him and all the rest of it. And he just thought, I might have a go at this. So, quite literally quit the band, came back to the UK, and just started cooking, beers at home on a rice pan on his hob with his, kids running around and all the rest of it. And then him and his wife started a barbecue joint, which is called Duke's, which was in East London. And then slowly, they sort of did, amazing meats. And then people just started to really dig the beer and like the beer. It was almost like the beer became more famous than the food and the restaurant. And he sort of thought, right, well, maybe I've got a bit of an angle. So he started to perfect the recipes and speak to some of the guys and girls in the US to sort of learn, some of the craft and really listen and become a bit of a sponge for craft beer. Meanwhile, one of the waiters he was working at the restaurant, he's called Dwyer, had just graduated from St. Martin's. And he was a designer, a graphic designer, visual illustrator. And he basically was just sort of doodling and showing them to Logan, and Logan started digging them, and then they started turning them into beer labels. And then basically then he had the beer, the physical beer, then he had the work that Nick did, which is that visual world that people are kind of most familiar with from Beavertown. And then the name came because Duke's was based in Beavertown in East London, and locally apparently. It's known as Beavertown, and that's kind of where it came from. So they stuck those three things together, and that was, how Beavertown was born in 2011, and it's grown from quite literally being in a kitchen of a house to being in a kitchen of a restaurant to being on an estate in Tottenham. And we recently opened, London's biggest brewery, sort of towards Enfield, just out of Tottenham. So yeah, it's a huge growth. And I've worked for lots of brands that people love, and people really love this brand. It's amazing, and people dig the beers like Neck Oil and Gamma Ray, and people dig the visual identity that we have as well. So it was sort of born out of Logan and then Nick, and that's sort of where Beavertown comes from.
Right. So I'm fascinated by those type of journeys because some people will imagine, I had it all out of the gate. I knew what I was doing. It doesn't sound like that in this case. There was a sort of like a patchwork of incidences and serendipitous encounters that comes up with it. And how did you get to the voice of Beavertown?
Yeah, no, I think definitely Logan and Nick would quite happily say that it was moments of inspiration, serendipitous moments, happy accidents, and it just sort of really organically grew. And one of the big, challenges that we've been on as a business is how do you take all of that wonderful magic, right, both internally and externally, and turn that into a highly functioning business that are in all the shops you want it to be in, and all the and all the pubs and restaurants you want it to be in as well. So that's definitely been part of the journey. It definitely there was no 12-step plan, 90-day plan, 2-year domination. I just wasn't that sort of journey, and actually brands talk a lot about authenticity and have to retrofit and recreate the authenticity if it kind of wasn't there. But certainly to a large degree, it kind of is. And I think you can literally taste that in the beers. You can taste that in the product. There is a palette, which is kind of Logan's palette, to the drinks that we make. Now, luckily, lots of other people enjoy the types of drinks that Logan and Nick and the people that work here do. So that kind of helps. But yeah, it's been it's definitely been a journey with lots of kind of zigzagging in it.
So on your website, you say that you are producing in your Enfield place 90 million pints. What's your footprint around the world? Where are the markets that are the biggest and growing the fastest, and/or?
Yeah. So UK is by far the biggest, and that's the one that we've concentrated on. There's certain elements of Europe which are big, Scandinavia, France, and some other countries as well, and that's sort of the part of what the future plan is. But it's really about concentrating on the UK. And I think the reason for that is the US really led craft beer, as I said before. I think the UK followed that. I don't think they followed it particularly quickly, actually. I think it took a while for it to kind of take off. I think Southeast Asia, it's massively taken off in as well, and obviously Australasia. Europe, slightly less so. And actually, I think there's lots of different reasons. In France, they obviously have huge consumption of wine, and therefore beer is not necessarily has the same sort of cultural role that it does in the UK. So I think for us, it's like, rather than concentrate in lots of different pots, let's concentrate on one, do a really good job, nail it, and then move on. So the main focus, has always been and continues to be the UK.
Well, if I were a large brewery in the United States and I saw Beavertown, for me, it's a shoe-in to buy you, because we will have the footprint, the distribution challenges that come with a new country. And the British element of Beavertown, that particularly goofy palette and palette of colors, palette of design, and all that has to work. So I'm extremely bullish on you guys in general. Now that you're in charge of marketing, though, Tom, you've got this patchwork of things, a specific palette. You've got these kooky names and images, neck oil, gamma ray, whatever. Um, when you're in other countries, to what extent do you have that need to render typical and the same the identity of the brand? You know, like all that when you get into big, well, it's the Pantone color for this, and it's this size typeface for that, and where are you in that kind of a place?
Yeah, it's still extremely organic. I guess the thing for us is about, you know, how do we take this brand which is loved and just put it in front of more people, right? As it is. And my role really is like, how do you bottle up or can up the magic and not lose any of that stuff that we talked about from the sort of founding elements of it, but do it in a way which is still accessible to people that know nothing about craft beer, right? And I think it's very important actually that it is accessible for people that know nothing about craft beer. Ultimately, beer should just be there as a compliment for having a good time and, you know, meeting with friends and hanging out with your family and whatever else, right? So we have to do that. Now, there has to be a level of taking the sort of madness that's within the brand and translating it from design into marketing, but without losing any of the stuff. And that is a really, really thin line. And something I, you know, say a lot is we are a coherent brand. We are not a consistent brand. So all of our cans look different. The logo is sometimes different, which is just, you know, from a traditional sense, it's just utter madness, right? But the logo can be different in different places. It can even have different colors on it. Like, you know, it just doesn't, you know, tradition doesn't make any sense at all. But consumers are smart enough, I think, and we think, to be able to understand the coherency of the brand. So the challenge is bottling up all of that magic, keeping some of that madness, turning it into something that actually functions and delivers in a marketing sense, and continues to get the beer in front of people that might want it, rather than getting to the point where here's a brand book, here's some font sizes, here's some colors. Now, it would be an awful lot easier to do that, right? And logic and experience tells you that that is the way to do it. But it just doesn't feel right, actually. And it's sometimes frustrates people because they're like, well, just, you know, if you just give me the thing and tell me the color and but it kind of has to go through the process. And Nick is heavily involved in everything, right? He's sort of still, you know, he will one day be drawing, you know, the ad that goes on the side of a bus, and the next day he might be drawing a beer with that, right? And he wants to do that because it still needs to have his
imprimatur,
artistic, and his artistic stamp on it. And when it doesn't, you see it, you know, and then it doesn't go out the door, you know. Well, so it's madness and a bit of magic, I think.
Well, Tom, I personally have, I mean, having lived through the old versions of the traditional style of marketing, and you mentioned youth marketing, but for sure, marketing as a genre or a métier has changed because we've got so many more different ways to do it. And I think that breaking those codes is fascinating because, as you say, you're coherent, not necessarily consistent. Being that you're selling beers, you also have lots of regulations as to where you can market it. Obviously, you have on trade and off trade and those types of configurations. I was wondering, how do you deal with social media? What is your, just obviously from an educational standpoint, because you're in a regulated industry, I and certainly people listening may not know all the constraints, and those would be different by country. But, with a brand that thinks like a band, you're clearly going to be out there and people are going to be, even if it's not the star of the barbecue, people are going to be wanting to show it, do photographs. I would love to know, how do you manage that piece?
Yeah. So I guess at the root of all of it is we will comply and adhere to all regulations that we need to. You know, you have to say you're 18 to get onto the website and all the sensible things that are there for very, very good reasons.
Age gates.
So we will always adhere to all of that. I think from that, then it becomes a question over the type of brand you are. So how do you want to portray yourself on social media, regardless of sector? And then I think there's certain decisions that you have to make, you know, moralistically probably sounds a bit too strong, but certainly, you know, you have to decide how you want the brand to be portrayed. So if you look at how hard seltzers are advertising themselves, it's, you know, very party focused, it's very young, good looking people all having a great time, consumption, right? And that's cool. And if they want to do that, that's fine. I think ours is actually more built on our social media channels, to me, are editorial channels. So it's almost, the way I talk about it a lot is it's like a magazine, right? So every post is a different page on a magazine. Some might lead more towards product. You know, you've got an ad in a traditional magazine that might have some, you know, conditioner stuck to it or whatever back in the day. And then the next one might be an interview, or the next one might be just a photography shoot or whatever, right? And social should be that textual experience of bringing to life different aspects of the brand. So some of those things from a regulatory point of view, we need to be more conscious of, particularly the product stuff. It's more editorially led, and it's just a piece of artwork, or it's just a skeleton, or, you know, we have what we call gamma people that have, you know, gamma guns and shoot stuff and blow stuff up. Then, you know, it's more editorial. So it's kind of we can take a more branded approach to that than a product approach. But it's important that our social channels deliver the voice of the brand, because I think at times brands get lost and forget why they do social. They sort of do social because they feel like they need to do social, but it's like, well, you've got to have a reason to do it, right? Because otherwise it's just noise. So what's the reason? What's the why? So, you know, we try to create a kind of interesting, engaging way that delivers the brand, you know, and with, you know, multiple channels, multiple formats and all that kind of stuff. But ultimately, it's a tapestry, it's a magazine of different things. And if you don't like one post, it's fine, and the next one you might. And I think that's, you know, that social, when it's done well, feels like it should flow into your newsfeed, and it should be a part of, you know, what happens, and it reminds you of why you follow, rather than a hard sales tool, you know, or highly repetitive. That's another sort of issue, I think.
Right. So we were talking about rational and KPIs at some level. How do you measure social media then? Is there a Beavertown way of measuring which is different?
Yeah, well, I sort of have an ongoing joke around we should measure marketing by how many people get tattoos. And people,
I love
people
that.
do. Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, there was some, I saw 2 last week, in fact, actually, which is incredible. And it's amazing, you know, that people want to have that level of affinity with the brand. And interestingly, actually, you know, we've got some advertising live, sort of above the line at the moment. And someone was hanging out of their flat window and took a photo of our ad on the side of a bus and emailed it to us and said, look what I've just seen, right? That's not rational behavior. People don't take photos of advertising on the side of the buses and then send it to the company that's doing it, saying, look what I've seen, right? So the brand really has such strong affinity. So from a measurement perspective, beyond tattoos, you know, we look at all the traditional measurements. You know, we look at level of engagement, we look at level of saves, level of shares, you know, follows, unfollows, and all that normal stuff that you have. For me, all of that needs to have, it needs to ring true that ultimately it's going to drive a level of word of mouth and social buzz. And that word of mouth and social buzz will then flow up into your higher level awareness consideration, or, you know, whatever your brand equity measurements and metrics are. Do the ladders always ladder down where you can walk into a room and show exactly how A goes to B and B goes? No, absolutely not. And that is the eternal dilemma of marketing directors, marketing departments, you know, across the world. But I think if you can show the vibrancy of the channel, right, and the level of engagement and excitement and positivity, I think it goes a long way. Because I think, again, back to that rational and emotional thing, you're kind of winning hearts and minds, right? Both internally and externally. Look at this highly visible channel. You know, we've done this thing, and 1,000 people, 2,000 people, 5,000, whatever, have liked, shared, saved, and engaged with. And I think that's really important. I think the last thing on measurement is, regardless of algorithms and what does what, and, you know, blah, 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 dark arts and all the rest of it, people talking to their mates on your channels about what you're doing and having a conversation with the brand is the thing that makes me most excited and I like most. Now, whether or not that, you know, ranks us up the algorithms and all the rest of it, you know, maybe not. But people care, right? Like the person hanging out the window taking a photo. If you tag 4 mates in and go, "Oh, guys, have you seen this? It's amazing." Da, 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 da. Like that for me is, you know, you know, payback.
I love it. Really, that is what I would characterize as mindset marketing, what you're talking about. And the brand, the tattoo story is absolutely hilarious, because about, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, I wrote a piece about, does your brand pass the brand tattoo test? And absolutely cottoned in on that. And why I really was keen to have you on. I've long said that there's a conference, for some people who might know it, called South by Southwest, that had been going on for many, many years in the weird town of Austin, Texas. And what was brilliant about it, we had interactive film and music. I don't know if you've ever gone, Tom. Have you gone?
I haven't gone. I've almost got there twice, but I've never committed.
So it's a fantastic place. It's got this whole thing called interactive, all about digital and new tech. And then you have these other ones, which are nominally completely different audiences, different participants, which is all around film and then music. And I always said, well, you know, if you're a marketer, forget the interactive piece. Go check out the bands, how they market themselves. Go check out the films, how they create great stories and market those stories. And that's where you should get inspiration. Didn't really work because people too fixated. But you guys have, and I loved what you said, you know, don't think like a brand, think like a band. Okay, so now we said that. What would you say are 1 or 2 tips that other marketers could consider? Because obviously they might be working for a pharmaceutical company or a bank. It's a little bit long way to go. But what within that idea of considering yourself like a band, because maybe you need to be like a Bach, you know, orchestra as opposed to a punk band.
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, it's a really good point, actually. I think, I mean, interestingly, you know, there's all types of different people that work at Beavertown, and that's, you know, one of the great things about it. We do, however, you know, over-index, as I've said before, in people that are failed musicians. So all of us have done that, like, desperately trying to, you know, hand out flyers or, you know, do it virtually and get people to sign up to come to gigs and texting people and all that sort of, you know, grassroots, you know, which I'm sure in textbooks is like guerrilla marketing. Because you want people to come to your show, right? Because you care, you give a shit, right? Because you spent so long writing songs that you care about and pouring
rehearsing
heart out. Yeah, right. So there's an element of, you just have to have skin in the game, and you have to, you know, part of it is you have to care about the brands you work for and with. You have to at least have some kind of personal alignment, because otherwise it becomes a very functional transaction. So I think at the root of all of it is you kind of want to get in the mix, right? You kind of want to get out on the street, handing out flyers, the whole analogy, classic analogy of sweeping the floors, so there's an effort reward aspect to it. So I think that's one thing. I think the orchestration and the conductor point is a good one, and I have actively thought about that. You reminded me, actually. I used to talk about how one of my previous roles as the brand director at giffgaff was around orchestrating the campaigns. So you are the rock solid. I know what this piece of music is going to sound like. I know where we want to, what we want to deliver to the audience, right? And I've always said for an audience, I would rather the audience walk out or cry than sit there and think it's nice, right?
Yeah.
So when they perform, when the Rite of Spring was performed for the first time, supposedly, the history says, there was a riot, right? Amazing. That's amazing. What an amazing thing to create. So you've got to orchestrate that feeling you're getting across to that audience, and whether or not that's a omni-channel approach, or above the line or below the line, or it's CRM, whatever it is, right? You're the orchestrator that makes all of that happen. And in part, it's an album, isn't it? Like, it's not just one. You don't want to just have one hit, right? You want to construct a whole visceral and emotional, feeling across what you do for a brand over a period of time. And
I'm thinking more like a double album than a single album, actually.
Yeah, well, yeah,
like Tommy,
exactly.
That kind of a thing from the Who, where it's because one album is almost just a lot of singles almost. Double album, that's a freaking story. Seconds out, that's a freaking story.
Yeah, exactly. So I think if you can, you have to have commitment to do that, though, don't you? Right? Mm-hmm. You have to have a vision and you have to see it through. And equally, some people are not going to like it, right?
And that's
so you
great.
Kind of have to. You have to accept that.
You need to have that, actually. Let them have their riot.
Yeah, and I think that's important, but it's hard to do, right? Because you're worried about stakeholder management, internal politics. Yeah, exactly, and that's hard. So I think that grassroots attitude, that conductor role of having a vision, a purpose, and stuff that people feel like that they can, your orchestra can do and believe in, and let them have their solos and their moments and all the rest of it, and also having that courage and that commitment to see it through. I think anyone, regardless of business or sector, can do that. And you don't need to fight the good fight every day on a rainy Monday in January where you're broke and you just want to go back to bed. But you've got to turn it on when it's appropriate. And I think that for me, I think is possible for anyone, really.
So to be clear, if I were to wear tattoos, I would feel like one of you have a choice of little icons, and the mindset and your mission, which is to encourage everyone to unleash their creative potential. There's so many wonderful, wholesome in an ethical component to it, despite the fact that we're talking about drinking beer per se. Let's say that some people might think that not so good, but I absolutely adore it. One of the things that I always maintain, or I certainly made a central part in my last book, You Lead, I talk about how your number one fans must be your employees. So I was wondering how that is within Beavertown, and to what extent, and how do you recruit? How many failed times have you tried to be a musician?
I've failed at being a musician from when I was 13 to 30 something, and there's a part of me that still thinks, well, maybe, I'll just make some sort of entirely instrumental sort of like mindfulness, one tonal album, and that will sort of be my moment. But I haven't quite got there. So ultimately failed a lot of times and continuing to fail. I agree with you. Culture is the number one catalyst for a hugely successful business versus a successful business or not a successful business. There's a fantastic book called The Advantage, and I'm rubbish at names, so I can't remember who wrote it. But
I'll find it.
And what it talks about is every business tries to hire great strategists, great marketeers, great finance people, great, production people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The advantage of businesses that have low levels of politics, high levels of communication, celebrate and support brilliant talent, removal and management of poor talent, clear vision, et cetera, and that is so true, right? Because ultimately, if the experience of the people that work for the business is very different than the experience that happens online or in the real world, not only are we that work for businesses in the real world, right? So it's not as if we're completely divorced and the lines are completely blurred through, Glassdoor and LinkedIn and all the rest of it. But so that will just seep into the world. But you can't expect people, the spirit and the evangelism and the, support has to be infectious internally, because it just has to seep into what you do, certainly from a marketing perspective. And if it doesn't, then you just sort of, you're just mediocre, aren't you? So I think culture is undoubtedly the most important thing. And I think from a Beavertown specific perspective, it's been on such a huge growth journey, and it's continuing, as I said, from the marketing perspective, how do you bottle up all that greatness, from the early days and the spirit of it, and bring that and continue to have that as we travel through difficult times like the last year and a half, and into much more, better, positive, prosperous times in the future. And that's the key thing. What's important is, it's not my job, but it is my job. It's not Logan's job, but it is Logan's job. It's not Nick's job, but it is Nick's job. Everyone has to be there to deliver that culture. And that is unbelievably important. And I think that, businesses that get that right, truly deliver great things.
All right. So Beavertown manner of recruitment, in the question, so you play a rock and roll, do you play an instrument, laddie? Or and where do you find Beavertown employees? I mean, presumably there's some LinkedIn-ness, because I've seen you're looking for people actually now, but how do you recruit in a way that fits into that type of mindset?
Yeah, so I think I used to ask people at the end of interviews, what's the last song you listened to? And then people just looked at me and said songs they thought I liked. So I stopped asking that question. So I started asking, what's the one song you would put on a playlist if we were having that playlist in our tap room or whatever else? So, there are, those questions. I think what we find from a recruitment perspective is a lot of it is dependent on role. So particularly from brewers and production, they often, it's a tight family, actually, and there's a lot of word of mouth that happens around, well, actually, it's pretty cool to work here, or it's really interesting, we're working on this new stuff, or, whatever it might be. So from a production perspective, it's often driven through relationships. And actually, we have brothers and sisters that work here that have kind of, work in different teams and almost, started their careers together and grown up, which is great. Yeah, we do all the traditional stuff that you'd expect. We put roles on social media, we put roles on LinkedIn and all of that, and it's great. And we use our own networks. I think for us, there's definitely a cultural feel perspective. I remember when I went to meet Logan for the first time, and his office is above the brewery in Tottenham, and the volume of music was so loud to the point where I was leaning in to try and hear what Logan was asking me without sort of looking weird, like I was.
I want to kiss you.
yeah, exactly, like a complete sort of psychotic kissing maniac. And I just thought, this is the spirit of it, And I used to hold meetings in our tap room, which was next to the brewery, and again, really loud music. And I sort of almost did it deliberately, and it sort of made the meeting harder, but you just felt, sometimes literally in your eardrums, the spirit and the culture of the business. And what's important is if you come to those things and you think, God, I wish they'd turn the music down, you know, then you're not right, you know. So actually, just those sort of accidental cultural moments are quite good proof points for the culture and the type of people you want to bring in. And of course, we look at all the things like, I hired an amazing guy called Will from Paddy Power recently. You know, Paddy Power, amazing. Why would you not want to hire someone from there? So of course we look at stuff like
They
that.
come with a sense of humor.
But, yeah, they definitely come with a sense of humor, and it happens still, although it's not a criteria. Also support Tottenham Hotspur, so that's a
right. I was going to wonder about that because I'm a fan of the Reds of Liverpool, so I'm feeling like I'm a persona non grata in your space. But then, when we talked about this brand book idea, we got the logo, we got the typeface, and all that kind of malarkey. We've got the imagery, we've got that going on. Then there's this notion of voice. And within this, now I'm hearing there's actually a type of music, because I could tolerate some music loudly better than others. So if you're playing screechy music that kind of rubs me the wrong way, well, that is actually more a testament of the taste of music as opposed to the loudness of the music. If you were to put the Grateful Dead on, I don't want to hear you anymore. I just want to hear the Grateful Dead. So
yeah,
that's how I roll, if you will. I mean, as older we get a little bit more sensitive on the eardrums, but in it does feel like you need to actually have a harmony with the taste of music as well.
Well, I mean, it's a very interesting point actually. So, when I grew up in the 90s, you either liked metal or you liked what at the time was called jungle, and then sort of morphed into jungle drum and bass. And people would literally have, street fights over their tribes.
Mine's better than yours.
Yeah, and it was, it was sort of a bit weird, really. And it was sort of like, but I sort of like both, but you sort of weren't allowed. And, it's confusing. Being a 14, 13-year-old is, a confusing time. And what Spotify did, arguably, you could even drag that back to Napster and LimeWire and all the rest of it, is, yes, it democratized music, and we can argue about whether or not that's a good or a bad thing, of rights and earning money for musicians, but let's park that for the moment. Yeah. What it did is it gave people access to all types of different genres of music. So it's not just one sort of type. Now, I think craft beer traditionally leans into guys with beards and top knots and guitars, and I think that's sort of more coincidental than deliberate. But what we try to do as a brand is we try to be genreless. So we've worked with, Worldwide FM, We Out Here, which is, Charles Peterson of world music and jazz, Latin, hip hop. We've also worked with the Idols, who are, British, punk, indie, political, and actually the similarities, right? There's, highly political Latin music that you want to dance to, and there's highly political punk music that, you want to get in a mosh pit to and, smash down some beers and, break a chair. You don't have to separate those things. You can have those two things together. So it's important actually that we are genreless, and using the analogy of the brewers. I remember listening, being in a meeting, and there was, Black Sabbath, I can't remember what, War Pigs, a deafening volume, followed by Ronnie Size, followed by, some French pop, and it's like, well, why not? I think it's important. And I think what that does is it actually says we're sort of here for everyone as well. Back to the point of, you don't need to be deep into craft beer to enjoy our beer. If you are, wicked, and that's cool, right? We don't need to play the guitar to be able to like the song. You can just like the song.
The thing that struck me about what you just said is that it's actually, the link is the political stance rather than the musical taste.
Yeah, I think the link is a value. Actually, I think it's about open-mindedness. I think it's about I'm trying to avoid the word inclusivity, but I think it is about, we are all just people, and I think that definitely comes from Logan's personality, which is around, being very open, to points of view, different people, different experiences. And I think that's brought its way all the way down into what we might put on a Spotify playlist, So it's definitely an openness. If you are teleported from the 90s and you only listen to Metallica, Megadeth, and Machine Head, then you're going to come to our tap room, hear a playlist, and every half an hour you might like a song, but you'll hate the other 28 minutes. So, you don't share that value set that we share.
Got it. So last zone of questions, Tom, is around e-commerce. Obviously, during lockdown, digital took off for everybody who woke up to its potential. E-commerce, of course, it's complicated because you're an alcohol company, but tell us about the success of your e-commerce as part of your strategy. How much does it represent, if you can tell us? And what's selling? Is it more merchandise? Is it actually beer? And within the merchandise, I want to know what's the top seller.
Yeah, so we were doing, prior to lockdown, about £20,000 a month, and then quite literally overnight that went up to £100,000, and we saw a huge spike, and those spikes coincided with all types of different government decisions, but also things like the football that happened recently. So there's been a huge transformation in our e-commerce team, and Hannah, that runs it, has just done an amazing job. I mean, literally, we had a room with one or two people, which was windowless and a bit grotty, with a crap Bluetooth speaker, sticking stuff in envelopes, and now we have a big warehouse with packing tables and all the stuff that you'd expect to get beer out the door from an e-commerce perspective. So it really has been night and day. Now, COVID hit us hard. 80%, 85% of our trade is on trade, so we that closed. We lost that overnight.
Restaurants, e-commerce, and bars, and so on.
Yeah, just closed in line with lockdown and the government guidelines. So we lost that. E-commerce helped, but it certainly didn't plug the gap. So we've seen a huge transformation. By far, what people buy is beer, right? Like, it sounds pretty obvious. And people buy, they buy in bulk, because it's like, well, you're not going to just buy one or two cans. And actually, it's about different behaviour, isn't it? If you're going to pop into a supermarket, we're in Waitrose, Tesco, all the places you'd expect us to be. You might buy a 4-pack and, stick it in your basket and, buy your groceries and all the rest of it. If you come into our website, you're going to buy 24 beers. You might peruse our specials. We have a monthly special that launches every single month, or almost every month. There's lots of demand for those types of experimentation, and we do all sorts of wild and wonderful things. We sell a lot of glassware. People love our glasses. I'm convinced that we're the most stolen pint glass in the country. So people when they're not stealing them, people buy them, which is nice. But we do make up a large proportion of kind of merch, because of we deliberately try to make t-shirts that look like band t-shirts, basically, and that's not because we want to make t-shirts that look like band t-shirts. We make t-shirts and they happen to look like band t-shirts. Mm-hmm. So beer is by far our biggest seller, but it's supported by other sort of items that people sort of make up into their total basket. So it's a fantastic part of our business, and there's huge growth opportunities in it. And I'm amazed that certainly traditional beer brands completely underestimate and don't seem to get involved in the world of owning direct channels. And I get it, because it's about fear of dilution and fear of capitalization, fear of cannibalization. There's a general fear of capitalization. That's another thing. But let's make hay while the sun shines. So yeah,
bloody right.
It's
well,
really great.
They are so generally far away from your mindset. It is a country mile, to use an expression you had before, away from it. So rock on, as they would say. I personally, the name of your psychedelic pint glass is already, you got me going, as you can imagine, and I've long lasted it and lusted after one. So now I know how to find one on the website. Tom, thank you so much for coming on the show. What is the best way that anyone could follow you, contact you and, of course, get a taste for the wonderful Beavertown products and merchandise?
Yeah, so if people want to follow me, they can follow me on LinkedIn, or I am on Instagram. So they can pop over there and look at some photos of stuff that happens every now and again. And of course, they can go to our website and pick up all the beer that they want for, wonderful occasions. It might be sunny soon. It's kind of the summer, so it's a perfect time to get some beers in. So,
well, anytime's a good time, Tom. As far as I'm concerned, drink responsibly, of course. Anyway, Tom, super. Thanks very much for coming on the show.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having listened to this episode of the Minter Dialogue podcast. If you like the show and would like to support me, please consider a donation on patreon.com/MinterDial. You can also subscribe on your favorite podcast service. And as ever, rating and reviews are the real currency for podcasts. You'll find the show notes with over 2,000 and more blog posts on minterdial.com. Check out my documentary film and 4 books, including my last one, You Lead, How Being Yourself Makes You a Better Leader. And to finish, here's a song I wrote with Stephanie Singer, A Convinced Man.
A stranger tucked around me, precipitating the danger. To feel free, trust is the reason. Still I won't toe the line. I sit here passively, hope for your respect, anticipating the thrill of your intellect. Maybe I tell myself there's no use in me lying. I'm a convinced man, building an urge. I'm a convinced man, to live and die submerged. A convinced man, in the arms of a woman. I'm a convinced man, challenge my fate. I'm a convinced man, competition's innate. A convinced man, in the arms of a woman. Despise revenges and struggle with deceit. Live for the challenge so life's not incomplete. What's wrong with challenge? I know soon we all die. I like the feel of a stranger tucked around me, precipitating the danger. To feel free, trust in my reason, and let me show you why. I'm a convinced man, practicing my lines. I'm a convinced man, here in these confines. A convinced man, in the arms of a woman. I'm a convinced man, admit to the test. I'm a convinced man, I'm ready for an arrest. I'm a convinced man, in the arms of a woman.